And so the other thing that was very interesting or important to Utah was to look at, how many of these incidents are we getting inspected? Because again, that accountability factor for your constituents and your legislature really is very, just be able to show that, look, we got every single one in December, and we had some places where we didn't hit every single one, but we're closer than we were 2 years ago, or whatever the story is that you want to tell, or hopefully whatever the truth is that is made into the story that you need to tell. And so then again, we're sort of just rinse, lathering, repeating these different data sets. But this bottom piece looks a little bit boring, but kind of this is the spreadsheet output that Utah was manually creating every year. And I don't think that was a super long process, but somebody probably spends, Bart, you could say, I'm sure, but certainly a few hours, if not a day, pulling this stuff together for a baked time slice. And here we can change the time slice to whatever we want it to be, and we'll just get the answer. So that was pretty exciting. So as you can see, on the left, there's a number of different pages in this dashboard, and our belief is that since we're still really prototyping in Utah, at some point there'll be different dashboards for different roles, and users will be in roles, kind of this whole role-based security business. And so some of these pages will be in some dashboards, maybe focused on the overall program management. Some may be in inspectors' dashboards, or in production managers' dashboards, whatever. We haven't really figured out structurally how Utah wants to break that up. But if we click into the next one, we start to look at inspection information, which is an area that Utah has focused on pretty heavily. We worked with Line 45 very closely over the last year doing, they did a bunch of really great work defining the matrices for prioritizing wells for inspection. And we did the sort of other side of that, kind of getting that information out to the user through Data Explorer. But Utah's really, really serious about making sure they're getting the most important wells inspected. And so this lets us take a look, or lets Bart take a look really at everything that they're doing about inspections. And so again, we can look at, you're kind of familiar with the widgets now. We can look at the different counts of inspections that are happening. We have different sorts of slicing going on there. And if we scroll down, the other thing that Utah has done that's very interesting is assigning what they call WIT points to inspections. And so we really duplicated all the inspection count widgets that are dealing with how many actual inspections were done to show the WIT points. And the WIT points essentially score a type of inspection based on how long it takes to do. And so I don't remember what the details of that were, but here you can look at really how much, I think the idea is that a WIT point should sort of equalize. So when you see the fact that there are 4,200 WIT points in production environmental inspections, I think that's telling you that it's happening about twice as much as something like final, or taking about twice as much time as your final restorations bond release. Dan, Jarvis, or Bart, is that fair?
Yeah, that's a good description, Dave. A WIT point is essentially the equivalent to time that it takes to do it. So a WIT point essentially equals, if I recall right, 20 minutes.
Okay, great. So essentially what you're looking at is where you're spending your time. And so, of course, that gets really important. And one of the things that's very interesting is you can drop this down and look at it by inspector. Now, I think that's going to have different reactions for different folks, but as a manager, I think it sounds like it's a really powerful tool, and I know Bart could probably talk for quite some time about how they'll use that and implement that. The fact is here, we can put that information into Bart's hands to do with whatever he's going to do really very easily. And he was showing some very interesting charts to us yesterday when we first demonstrated this that showed really how the number of inspections they were accomplishing went way up after some events occurred, and then went down after some events occurred. And because he was able to look at that line chart, he was able to say, oh, well, we had staff retire at this point, we had different prioritization put in at this point, and I think those are going to be some more widgets that we put on the dashboard, so that those sorts of like numbers of staff compared to number of inspections completed compared to WIT points, we can look at some of those analyses. Do you want to add anything to that, Bart?
Not necessarily, Dave. Maybe just kind of stating like you previously stated, having the data available, and the data that I showed you was manually collected, but having the data available allowed us to tell our story on why things were happening, and also allowed us to make a decision of what our next step was in regards to that. So it actually did end up being empowering in that moment.
Cool. So I guess let's bounce on down. I don't know what our third page is there. So this is looking at permits to drill and sort of submitted versus approved. You can imagine all the cool things we could do there. Just sort of, we looked at paper versus web. It's interesting that now if we go back, let's change our time slice to something like 10 years, Adria, and take a look at that. And I think what we'll see is that, we see a lot of, I guess your e-permit system's been online for a very long time, so that explains, but we could go back and see the transition. One of the things that we talked about in states that adopt electronic forms is looking at the transition over time. So we might need to go back farther. What if we go back essentially all time there? So there you can see really when the cutover happened, was around somewhere, and we can maximize that and look at it. As that sometime in the middle of 2008 looks like when things really started to transition. So that stuff's very interesting from a storytelling point of view. And then let's go, I think Bart, you or Mark, I'm not sure who that is. Maybe Brad is rattling keys. But let's go back to maybe the last couple years and switch into the next tabs down. These are designed to be pretty performant, but sometimes if you click through with bunches of time slices, it takes you longer. So here's looking at their e-form system. Because Utah's e-forms are primarily required monthly submittals, they're pretty consistent. So if they were collecting APDs in e-form, you'd see a lot more variation. But these are forms, they're UIC forms that are required either annually or monthly, and so they're gonna be pretty consistent. We can click on down and look at production information. We could just as easily look at injection also, and so oil, gas, and water are all in RBDMS here, and so we take different looks at those. Again, wishing for more granularity in the geography, and then charts looking over time. Let's skip the next one, Adria, and go down to inspection prioritization. I think this one is really only going to have data for about the last couple months, but that's okay. It'll show up in this 2-year slice. So, Paul, you asked about being able to click through and see sort of the components in other sort of the details. And here I'm just sort of bridging the two topics that we had, some of the enhancements to dashboards. So here, what this is telling us really is that today there are 29 priority 1 facilities, 986 priority 1 wells, et cetera. And so the obvious question, kind of like show me which incidents made up that heat map over in Utah, is what are those 29 wells? Because really that's what somebody wants to do today. So if you click on the 29 facilities there, it's going to open up a screen which shows you a map with those 29 facilities and the grid of those facility details. So the next step from here, right, would be if you had the field inspection app, all we'd have to do is put a link on that facility and you could start the inspection. The other cool thing here is that, Adria, if you'll kind of click on any one of those facilities in the grid or in the map, either way, it'll highlight and zoom to the corresponding facility in the map. And so this sort of binding of widgets is also all configured on the database side of things and is very generic. So really we're just sharing, we're telling the widgets what the selected key is, and we're telling the widgets what they should do with that key, and they can carry out the rest based on what type of widget it is. So if you just click a few of those other facilities, you'll see the map move around and show us where those are.
Hey, Dave,
and that map,
can you zoom out once you're in that?
Yep, you can just use your mouse wheel to zoom out there. Yeah, and you can click and drag and move it around and things like that. And if we wanted to, if we wanted to have more layers on the map, that's something we could also do. And that's just an open layers map. There's nothing super exciting about that except, that it works and it's easy. And so then you also have the ability to define, what's in your tooltip on the map. So as you mouse over those, you can see what you want to see. So, and then if you click the back arrow on the bottom left of the screen there, Adria, it'll take you back and reload this screen that takes a little bit of time. One of the things we did on, it's kind of like the same thing that Carrie was talking about. The data prep is a thing. In a lot of these screens, we basically build out fact tables and we just update them once a night. And I didn't do that for this, and that's why it takes a little longer to load. But I can imagine that what we would do is, as part of that whole prioritization, once the prioritization is finished each night, we go run these standard things and spit these fact tables out so we have all that data in our hands. So then the next one down, I believe, is the frequency. Now this one you'll have to go into year to date, I think, to get really anything useful here. So what did I lie? I did lie. Give it just a second. I'm not sure I believe it. There we go. I thought that was a holdover from the last one. And the same thing here. I haven't done the work to fact table this, so it takes a little longer. But this is essentially telling us, this is of the prioritized wells and facilities, or actually just wells here, how long is it taking on average to get them inspected? And so that, I think what Bart is after here is looking, okay, if I'm seeing these numbers change a lot or drop a lot or increase a lot, really more in our line charts for any certain type of well, that might indicate to him that there was some sort of an issue. And the data here is a little bit spotty because it's really only based on some test data runs of the prioritization module. So that's why you're seeing some sort of weird 8-1, 8-18, 9-4, 10-1 dates there. But Bart wanted these broken out for essentially the active wells, and then if we scroll on down, there's another category of essentially your inactive wells, which are your P&A and your LA wells. And then again, you've got at the very bottom your drilling wells. And Bart just gave us some feedback yesterday on some changes that'll be pretty quick to add in sort of an overall category, like how long is it taking us on average to inspect any active well. So those will be some good enhancements. And then the last one before we switch over is the prioritization history. So this is really looking at how the number of wells, facilities, and incidents in different priorities change over time. And again, I'm sort of talking more about the why than the what. But the what is, it doesn't matter what this data is. We got grids and line charts, and it's really easy to add new widget types to shape in data. We think it's probably a matter of a day or two to add, or maybe even less, to add new widget types, so that we have the ability to have, stacked area charts or line areas or really whatever we want to do that are somebody wants to use to look at data. So that's kind of the first sharing I want to do. Do people have questions about this part of it that they haven't already asked?
What's the technology behind it?
Okay, so the front end is built in React, and it's a purely, HTML JavaScript app. The middle tier is .NET Core 3 Web API, and the backend SQL Server, but it doesn't care. We're probably using SQL objects now, but we could switch to Ole DB stuff and hit Oracle or Postgres or whatever really somebody wanted to. Okay, so the other thing that kind of came up as we were working in Utah with the dashboard was this desire to be able to look at AORs in a little more really in multiple dimensions, in 2D and 3D as you're working through them. And so we decided that we thought we'd be able to do that within the dashboard pretty easily. And so if we'll go over to the area of review page now, Adria, we don't actually imagine this being a page in someone's dashboard. Go last 2 years there. And so essentially what we're seeing here, these are all the AORs that have been run in the last 2 years in Utah. And so again, here's an example of drilling down to the data. So let's click on 1927, which is really just because it has the most number of wells. Oh, that's cool. Just hit a Control F5 there and see what happens, or something like that. There we go. So essentially what we've got here is we cheated, and we took we made a new widget type called a form view, because we didn't have the ability to really show label field type layout. And so the UIC well details and the AOR well details are examples of those. And what we literally did was pull those views out of data mining and just slap them in here. Then the bottom grid is also the data mining query, which lists all of the AOR wells. And of course, the more interesting side is the right side of the screen, where you're looking at a two-dimensional map, which is the same exact technology that we showed in the previous, where you have the grid linked and you can click on a well and it'll highlight in the grid and you can mouse over and all those sorts of things. And then really the most exciting bit is in the 3D map, where you can look at those wells and their well bores in 3 dimensions. And so I'm not sure you've driven this before, but if you click and drag down, it will rotate that around the x-axis, and you can look at those wells from the top going down. So a couple things about this. The first is your three-dimensional view is only as good as your data, right? So if the first thing you're going to, well, maybe not the first thing you're going to notice, but after you look for a minute, you're going to notice that there's some long blue lines running horizontally across, and that the AOR boundary is not at the top of the wells. So that's zero. That's sea level. And the reason that those well bores sit at zero, Bart explained to us, is probably because they don't have an elevation for their surface location or their bottom hole location at this time because they're permits. So that was an interesting we didn't go on that data hunt, thankfully. But for the rest of the wells that are drilled, you can see that we are showing a legend at the top for the hole, the perforation, the production surface casing, and the tubing and the wellbore. And so if you sort of rotate that back around the, I'm going to say x-axis, and someone's probably going to think that's wrong, but click and pull down even a little more so we can kind of look down from the top of the wellbore. Yeah, that way. Then you can, if you slowly mouse over the top of the wellbore, you should get tooltips for the production casing and the tubing and the different components there. And one of the things that I've found a little bit distracting is just the hole. So if you click on the hole in the legend at the top, it'll turn that off, and we can look more about the inside of the wellbore. So then if you spin it back up, so we're looking at the vertical wells, click, and yeah, then you can mouse over down below the AOR and see some of the tubing, and then if you down towards the bottom, there's some perfs in there, and you may need to turn off the production tubing and surface casings to get at the perfs. And one of our tickets is stop doing tooltips for things that are turned off.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
But you can kind of see those perfs down there at the bottom. And so really the interesting thing about this, it is interesting that we're showing really on the fly. None of this, I should be clear, none of this is pre-packaged data. We didn't go through and decide and build a scene or any sort of weird things. This is just data that's in RBDMS spitting out right now. So we could go to any AOR in the state and, barring some application error, look at that data. And it's really any event type. So the way that we're shaping the data behind the scenes is really quite interesting, in that these are all events with tops and bottoms and diameters. And the application, if I sent data in that said, oh, here's a, I don't even know, top and bottom of a jug that fell in the hole, well, it would draw a jug on there and put the top and bottom on it at the diameter that you told it was. And so it's really kind of future-proofed for states that have really robust data sets. Anything will flow in. The other thing that's pretty cool is that we're using generic geographic descriptions. We're using well-known text, which is an OpenGIS standard for describing features for the wellbores, and then the events are drawn along the wellbore. One of the things that someone will probably think to ask is, hey, sometimes now we have great directional data. Will this work on a well that has, 300 points down the wellbore? The answer is yes, it will. But we haven't done the work yet to drape events along that multi-segmented three-dimensional wellbore. It's accomplishable, but Utah doesn't have much of that data yet, so it wasn't a need for this. So these are straight lines from surface to bottom hole, and the events work on that. And they will work before we're done on the directional stuff.
And so, Dave, how are you dealing with wells that are just scanned images that just you maybe have a surface location but nothing else digital? I think at this point,
I don't know what we're doing, but it's subject to discussion, right? I mean, we might be saying, oh, that's a point, right? Or we might be saying it's a line with zero length. We might decide that we want to exclude them, or something like that. But those are interesting data questions that we're going to have to answer. But as long as the data is shaped right, we can make whatever choice we want there. Because there's certainly data like that. I think at this point we're probably tossing anything that doesn't have a top and a bottom, or a surface and a bottom XY. But clearly we're not throwing away things that don't have surface and bottom elevations, because that's what those blue lines are.
Right.
Yep. And so just for kicks, if you'll collapse this down, Adria, what we can see is there's actually interaction across these three components. So if you click on one of those wells in the grid, it'll zoom to it and highlight it in the map and in the 3D. That one's it's a little hard to see. And again, this stuff just came together in the last few days with the events, so our highlight's a little off. But you could click through any of the other ones, and it would move the highlight around in both of those screens. And so really the cool thing is, I mean, you could link up 3 or 4 maps and 3D views and grids, and they would all play together and synchronize, which is pretty cool. And just for kicks, if you go back one screen, let's go back, maybe open it up to 5 years instead of last year. And let's go look at another one. Something, there's not much that's much older. But we can just click on 9/11 there. It's got a few wells there. But just to sort of, boy, that's an annoyance. Let's do that Control F5 trick again. But just to show that we can really draw like real stuff. So here you can see that there's some more different types of events that came in, the intermediate casing and the conductor. So again, it'll just draw whatever you throw in there. So I think we kind of started out talking about dashboard as this big aggregator, and as we got into the technology and we got the interest in the three-dimensional, we realized that being in this new technology and React with a lot of good libraries for 3D rendering, that would really be a nice place to render the 3D view of the well bores. We kind of moved from this very generic, very aggregate thing to this, again, very specific thing, which is, I don't know what I think about that, but it's interesting. You can see, an interesting replacement of Data Explorer built on Dashboard, where we essentially use the map in Data Explorer to locate wells, and then we want to see details. It comes into a screen like this, where you can imagine not just rendering, 3D well bores, but also the 2D well bore, or production graphs over time, or really whatever you would want to do could be an interesting thing. So I'm going to just say, if anybody has questions, let's hear them. I'm going to glance back through my notes to see if I forgot anything.
I have a quick question. Sorry. This seems to be primarily internally facing. Is there any concept of turning it, putting it to the outside?
Absolutely, and really the sort of data that we've done in some cases, when you get into the inspection frequency or the inspection prioritization type stuff, really does feel to me internal focused. But everything else seems very suitable for public consumption. In fact, your public is likely more interested in production over time at an aggregate level than one well's production, right? So the vision is that there'll be public-facing dashboards, there'll be authentication and authorization for internal-facing dashboards, and potentially even industry-specific stuff where it's filtered down to their sorts of things. We're kind of in a good place where all of that seems very possible pretty easily. Some other things that are kind of in the works are obviously the authentication piece is high on the list. The other thing is that we intentionally built the dashboard without a user interface for editing the data supporting the dashboard because we knew there'd be a lot of changes in the first iterations. And so I think we're past that at this point. And so now what's happening is we're building the user interface to actually edit the dashboard configuration. So the goal is, for folks that are really familiar with their data and kind of wonky about stuff, they ought to be able to shape up and really put new widgets on dashboards, really quite quickly.
I thought I saw
Cool.
Yanwi's hand up again.
Oh, yes. So I saw this is pretty cool, sort of what you mentioned before. The data actually all directly pulled from the RBDMS.
The data in these cases is coming from RBDMS, but it actually doesn't matter. It doesn't care. There's nothing RBDMS specific about the application.
I just think, is there any consideration even turn this into some sort of one or the other facing public or become sort of reporting thing? Since you have a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely possible.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. A lot of really neat stuff going on here. And again, if you have suggestions on development suggestions or what features you'd like to see, or if you'd like to see if you couldn't implement one of these activities in your state, please email me, and we will start making things happen here. Again, I've recorded this session. So I will post that, and I'll post all the PowerPoints. I'll get those out there posted for everybody. We're probably going to have, we're thinking maybe another follow-up. The next webinar in this series will probably be in December. And if you can see my screen, here's a list of the topics that I've seen that have been requested that we couldn't fit in today's webinar, which is the field inspection, which is basically being beta tested in Montana and North Dakota right now. We've done a lot of work in Utah on prioritization for field inspection.
Paul.
Dave mentioned that. Was there a question there?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the list. I can just see your file explorer.
You're not seeing the list.
Oh, there it looks like it's trying to move over.
Let me try it again. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're just on the wrong monitor.
Yeah, let's try this one. Now, can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for asking that. Yeah, and so again, field inspection, we're beta testing that in North Dakota right now. We should be able to demo that next time. Prioritization, we've done a lot of work with prioritization of field inspection in Utah. But the next phase here, Utah specifically asked us to help them with some type of prioritization scheme for shut-in wells. And of course, nationally, we're going to be working on some kind of an orphan well prioritization scheme. We have updated the Well Finder app, which we will show you. We'll give you some demonstrations of that next time. It is available for download right now. Talked about orphan well already. Produced water tracking. People are asking what we're doing with produced water tracking, both quantity and quality. We can talk about that. We keep coming back on how are we going to use drone data in RBDMS. People are flying drones, but actually, can you use that? How can we incorporate that? We need to have a discussion on that. And we're currently updating the wellbore schematic. We should have something to show you on that next time too. And these are just potential topics. If you have other topics of interest, please email me, and we will get them on the list. And so we're thinking maybe mid-December. And I know 3 hours is a long time to sit in front of your computer screen and listen. We can shorten that to 2 hours if you want, although as you can see, we generally go over in our presentations with a lot of discussion. So it's really up to you. But again, we're thinking maybe mid-December for the next round of this. Any feedback or anything is always welcome. Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar, and it is always a pleasure to visit with you. I apologize again that we can't meet in person right now, but we're doing the best we can with these webinar series. So thank you for participating. And again, always email me with your suggestions, likes, don't like, your dislikes, and things of that nature. If you want these longer or separated out into one topic per session, let's hear from you. With that, thank you very much, and it's been an excellent session. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Good time.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to the
Thanks,
presenter.
Paul.
Okay.